Chapter 4. Even in this summer's humid breeze, I will not leave the house uncloaked. Laurel argues that the practice makes me even more conspicuous when all the ladies are in silks and light-laced shawls and working their fans to keep cool, but she has never had to navigate the streets as the dark grays. Before venturing off into the Grace district, I steal around the back of the house and fetch Callow, knowing she'll be grateful for the fresh air. Mistress Lavender doesn't approve of my taking my bird with me when I travel the district, but I don't care. Callow's talents are a familiar, comforting pressure against my shoulder, and she keeps people at bay. As we weave through the district, the homes of the upper nobility and the other Grace houses soar overhead, all columns and ironwork and huge windows that dazzle in the bright, sea-salted sunlight. The streets are lined with poplars and hydrangeas and azalea bushes that give off a rich, sticky sweet scent. With such lush surroundings, it's hard to believe the level of poverty that exists beyond the thick walls to the east in the common district. A labyrinth of drab buildings that houses those who can't afford the ornate residences of the Grace district. Merchants, servants, and even disgraced nobility are all relegated to the common district, unable to cross into the glittering world of the wealthy, unless on official errands. In fact, the only shops permitted in the Grace district are those belonging to upscale clothiers like Madame Laroche, merchants of fine goods, and apothecaries like Hildy. I didn't bother to try to hail a carriage. They wouldn't take me with Callow on my shoulder, and this close to the princess's birthday celebration, they are all overburdened anyway, teeming with passengers, worrying over errand lists twice as long as mine. Besides, I find the drivers unfathomably annoying. Either they refuse to stop for me, or they spend the entire drive quaking in fear that I'll use my Avila blood against them. The last trip I took almost landed me in a ditch after I popped my head through the front window to amend my destination and nearly frightened the driver to death. Liveried servants scuttle around the horses' clopping hooves, earning colourful oaths from the coachman. In all the tumult, everyone is too busy even to notice me, only wincing when they draw too near and Callow snaps at them. I encourage her to bite the noses off. The crowd carries me closer to the royal residence than I'd like. The palace, a behemoth of turrets and spires and battlements, looms over the Grace district. It's carved out of the very rose-stained stone of the Etherean mountain range, which rises at its back. I've heard the entrance to the Ethereum mines is below the palace itself. Crates of the powdered mineral trundle away toward the common district and the harbour to be sold overseas or to be bottled and stocked at the apothecaries here in the Grace district. Near the palace's elaborate gates of solid white gold stands a towering bronze statue of Leithana, Briar's first queen. The sun gleams against her broad shoulders. The Briar crown, a wreath of brambles and roses and thorns, sparkles on her head. Droplets of gold track down her forehead like melting wax, a symbol of the Etherean blood that blessed her rule. Leithana's is a story I know well. During the time before Briar, when the mortals would send their futile campaigns across the Carthagan Sea, Avila snuck into the court of the High King of the Fae and stole his staff. High King Orin was furious. The staff was the instrument of his power, and all of the Fae courts trembled to think what Avila would do with that prize. But not even the fiercest Fae warriors dared to go into Maltaire and retrieve the staff for their king. The Vila's land, saturated as it was with dark magic, would poison any Etherean who set foot in their domain, and so Orin set a challenge. The mortal who managed to retrieve his staff would win the right to rule the empty borderland. It was an arrangement that suited the High King well, as the victorious mortal would serve as warden to the Fae border, thus putting an end to the constant onslaught of foreign armies trying to breach the mountains. It seemed a simple challenge to the knights and princes and even kings who were valiant enough to make the quest, but those men focused on threats and brute force to recover the staff, killing the Vila and laying siege to Maltaire. Every one met his death in battle. Until Leithana. Using her own mind as a blade, Leithana negotiated her way into Maltaire under the flag of diplomacy. This was a woman who was rumoured to mount the heads of her enemies on the masts of her ships, but not a single drop of blood, mortal or Vila, was spilled in her endeavour. She convinced the Vila to return the staff to the High King. established her own truce with the dark creatures, promising that Maltaire would remain unmolested while she ruled Briar. Once Leithana returned to Etheria with the Fey staff, Orin was so grateful that he fashioned a wreath of bramble and thorn, gilded it, then blessed it with his very blood. It was a blessing that symbolized the Fey alliance, promised Fey protection, and ensured that only the new Queen's heirs could rule Briar from that day on. The crown itself would kill any usurper. As a child, when I was subjected to every manner of experiment to determine how a half-wheeler infant had appeared in Briar, I dreamed of what it took for Leithana to earn that crown. Our first queen was a warrior. Legend says she sailed into the realm. She was destined to rule on ships constructed of dragon carcasses, the great wings fashioned into sails and their enormous jaws roaring at bows. I'd read and reread Leithana's story until it was written on my heart. Repeated it to myself when the healing graces came, their brutal, cold hands holding me down while they drew vial after vial of my blood. Pictured myself wearing that fabulous crown as they dunked my head under vats of Etherian seasoned water until it filled my lungs, pretended that as they poured countless sticky sour tinctures and serums down my throat, I needed only to endure. One day it would be worth it. One day I would be like that first queen, untouchable. Someone hurtles past me so fast he drops his bundles, jarring me out of the cesspool of my memory. Kello screams and he fires off complaints and curses at me. Then I see myself mirrored in his gaze and he begins spluttering terrified apologies instead. And once again I'm reminded that my imaginings were nothing but childhood fancy. I'll never be a heroine like Leithana. In Briar, I'll only ever be a villain. Hildy is the one woman in Briar who doesn't treat me like I'm a pile of horse droppings on the street. Perhaps that's because she sees her fair share of oddities in her line of work. Or because she's like me, in a way. Both of us pinned by circumstance in a place we don't belong. I visit her personally for my own enhancements, instead of enlisting a servant to fetch them like the other graces do. She waves from behind her counter as I enter, the little bell on the door jangling merrily. A few of her other customers glance up. I let my hood fall around my shoulders and scrawl at them. The shop is empty in seconds. Always one to make an entrance. Hildy shakes her head. Sweat glistens on her tawny brow and she wipes it away with a long, lean-muscled forearm. In a realm where nearly everyone sports grace-gifted features, Hildy's refreshingly plain. Her black hair, sprinkled with grey, is swept into a messy bun beneath her cap, and fine scars, the marks of her trade, etch themselves across the backs of her hands and along her fingers. Sorry. I settle Kello on the counter and fasten my cloak. The scent of enhancements is so thick I can taste the earthy sage and the tang of citrus, laced with the undercurrent of coppery blood. I didn't mean... They'll be back. Hildy shoos away my apology. She fishes a few dead beetles from a jar for Kello, who gobbles them up as if she hadn't already eaten her weight in venison trimmings this morning. I'll not be lacking for the coin, I can tell you that much. Not with everyone losing their minds over the ball. Now, what can I get for you today, Alyce? I hand over the list. Hildy doesn't flinch as her fingers brush mine. This isn't your usual sort. It's not for me. I didn't even try to keep the salts out of my tone. Rose sent me. Hildy snorts. I see. High and mighty Grace, too busy to come here herself. But never too busy for Madame Laroche. What a surprise! Setting the parchment on her counter, Hildy begins filling the order. I let my attention drift. Dried plants hang in bundles from the eaves. Sachets of periwinkle and yellowed bouquets of calla lilies and leathered strips of birch bark. Vials of every sharp size and color crowd the shelves. Stuffed wildlife with glass eyes snarl down at me from high corners. Hildy's pets, she calls them. I don't see why you let them order you about. The apothecary's voice is muffled as she roots around in the back stores. They aren't any different than you are. You know that's not true. Why? She reappears, half of Rose's order stacked precariously in her arms. Because your blood is green and theirs is gold? She wrinkles her nose. I have never liked gold much myself. Too gaudy. I don't think the rest of Briar agrees with you. I begin helping her pile the items into a sack. They started a war over it once. The rest of Briar can take a dive off the Crimson Cliffs as far as I'm concerned. A strangled laugh escapes me. What? They can. Obsessed with charm and beauty and whatever other fripperies those graces can dish out. Mark my words, Alyce. When the Ethereans created the graces, they weren't doing us a favor. I still look round, Hilly and her conspiracies. She's been breathing in too many of her potions. Grace children are the most coveted in the realm. Expecting mothers, especially those in the common district, pray that the Ethereans will visit and grace their unborn babies. More of your stories, Hildy? Kello pecks at a glass case filled with withered snake carcasses, and I nudge her away. Don't sass me, little miss. Her honey brown eyes narrow. If you used your brain, you'd know I'm right. The entire realm has gone mad for grace elixirs. Nobles rip one another to bits to get a particular shade of hair or a clever tongue. It's a fate trick, girl. They're laughing at us from their courts, same as when they set that challenge. Confusion rumples my brow. You mean the challenge to win the Briar crown? And do you know of any other challenge set by the Fae? No. I grab a handful of small vials and stuff them into my sack. But I don't see why you think it was some kind of trick. When have the Fae done anything that didn't suit their own interests? Mortals mean little enough to their kind. Why should we? We're gone in a blink, and they live nearly forever. Hildy tosses another beetle at Kello, who snaps it out of the air and chitters with delight. And now that poor princess, reduced to a breeding mare, having to pop out heirs in order to keep the throne secure. Last heir indeed. You see how much the Ethereans care about her plight. There's nothing poor about Briar's royal family, but I keep that back, even around Hildy. Maybe, but I still think Leithana deserved to rule Briar. I read about her campaigns before she came here. Did you know that she overthrew the Cotton King because of the way he treated his people? That's why the island isn't a monarchy anymore. And her crew was mostly women. They all had a say in what missions they undertook. Things would be better in Briar these days if the queens had followed Leithana's lead. Hildy places a hand on her chest. I had no idea I had such a devout follower in my shop. Something burns in my chest, and I try to smooth it away with a shrug. I know my history is all. Indeed. Hildy taps her sorrel-stained fingertip on the lid of a jar. I imagine you know far more than I do. But I ask you this, Alyce. Was it a victory Leithana won when they put the Briar crown on her head? Or a curse? Curse. The word slithers between my ribs, and the scar just to the right of my navel twinges. I clench my fist to keep from touching it. I'm the only one cursed around here. Are you? I hadn't noticed. She opens the jar and frowns. Damn, I'm out of robin's eggs. Your precious Grace will have to do without. I chew my lip. If I go back without every item on Rose's list, she'll throw a fit. I'll get them myself then. There are some thickets outside Briar's main gates where I've gone before to gather robin's eggs. It shouldn't take that long. Hildy grunts and folds the list in half, passing it back. Sounds like a fool's errand. I'd be a fool if I give Mistress Lavender any more reasons to scold me. I reach for the sack, but Hildy snags my wrist. There's an unfamiliar seriousness to her expression. There's a reason you're drawn to the First Queen, she says. I know a bit of history too. Enough to guess that there is power in you, girl. More than you realize. I look forward to the day when you wake up and start using it. The apothecary's words follow me as I make my way to the stone walls that divide Briar into the Grace and Common districts. There's a line of merchants and servants queued at the gate, wagons being inspected by Grace district guards to ensure against smugglers and chiefs. For once, my appearance works in my favor. It's not uncommon for me to visit this district on my way to the main gates, and I am allowed to bypass the checkpoint without the proper papers, slipping through a side door with hardly a nod from the guard. In the common district, grimy houses and storefronts are packed together like pickled fish. My reputation known even in this filthy place, I keep to the alleys, dodging grubby sheets, drying on clotheslines and clusters of chickens that scatter at Kello's elongated shadow. Too often I've been chased by a pack of local children who think it amusing to use my back as target practice for rotted fruit or piles of dirty wash water. I keep my hood tucked down. But even my heightened awareness is not enough to bury Hildy's ridiculous prediction. She spoke as if my power was some kind of blessing, but my heritage has been drilled into my head since I was old enough to comprehend it. I am part Vila. My kind was ruthless and unfeeling and driven out for good reason. I deserve to be punished for their crimes. Even so, an inexplicable boldness flashed through me at the apothecary's touch. What if Hildy's right? What if I can do more than the Graces? When I was first learning how to use my gift, we found that my power is unpredictable at times. Without enhancements, Grace blood does little more than sparkle, but a drop of mine can act all on its own. Healing Graces used to dread treating me because my blood was known to cause burns or sores if it dripped on their skin. The bowls they used for my bloodletting would often rust or corrode. And then there is what I did to Rosa T a few days ago. A terrifying part of my soul whispers that I can do far more than spoil a jug of cream. That I want to. After the guards at the main gates wave on me, I try my best to drown this feeling in the sea breeze. The coastal landscape of green earth and craggy rock has always been a refuge for me. Out here, there are no graces or patrons or house standings. Only the Carthagean Sea swallowing the horizon, a depthless blue that stretches all the way to realms I've only read about. Sometimes Laurel jokes that I would be a wisdom grace if my blood was gold, for I devour every atlas and geography text I can get my hands on. According to those books, Briar is the smallest realm in the world. We've only the Grace and Common districts, and a smattering of homesteads outside the main walls. Other realms boast a seemingly endless expanse of villages and cities and landmarks. I remember tracing my fingertips along the ribbons of blue, marking the rivers, measuring the lakes with the pad of my thumb, connecting the dots, denoting the towns like constellations, testing their names on my tongue, and imagining what the citizens living within those places might look like, or sound like, or believe. In Turna, a landlocked queendom 10 times our size, they worship dozens of goddesses, one for every season and emotion and aspiration. In Carden, the small island now governed by several influential families, decisions are made by debating and casting votes. And then there are the tantalizing undiscovered places just waiting to be explored. A bell rings in the distant harbour, where Briar's great ships are moored and swaying on the waves. High on their masts, golden flags, emblazoned with the Briar rose, snap and rip in the wind. From their bows jut dragon heads, and homage to Leithana, their jaws wide and grinning, as if the creatures cannot wait to be untethered and set loose on the sea. Not for the first time, I wonder what it would be like to be aboard one of those ships, to feel the scrape of the salt wind on my cheeks, nothing but ocean in front of me, to see the glimmer of the palace fade behind me forever, to never hear the words dark grace uttered again. But the grace laws forbid any grace from leaving Briar, even after she's faded. The crown doesn't want other realms accessing a grace's blood, golden or silvered, on the chance that the Etherean magic could be used against us. The Grace Council went so far as to train packs of hunting dogs to sniff out grace blood. Each ship is searched before it leaves port. Any grace found below decks is severely punished. But I'm not a grace. The thought flames hot. I smother it. Beyond the harbour, heat undulates against the crimson cliffs. With sea-slicked rocks, the colour of wet mortal blood, the cliffs are named for the time before Briar existed, when the Light Fae used the power in their staffs to summon squalls and tidal waves to shove back the human ships that dared trespass, sending them to shatter against the garish rocks as if they were no more than wooden playthings. It's said that the seabed around the cliffs is nothing but bones and rusted swords and ghostly hulls. A shiver races between my shoulder blades. Once Leithana was crowned, the realms across the Carthagean Sea didn't dare antagonize the ruler who'd won the Ethereans' challenge and earned the Fae alliance. And centuries later, none want to jeopardize their stake in the Ethereum trade by souring their relationship with Briar. But wealth is the only legacy Leithana left behind. As her reputation was enough of a deterrent, Leithana waged no wars against invaders. Even so, she and her early descendants built up a formidable army and navy, the envy of the world, if the stories are true. But as time passed, the warrior queens softened. They saw little use for a strong defense when the Ethereum was security enough against any foreign threat. So the military funds were diverted to tasks such as beautifying the Grace District and constructing a new palace. And worse, the queens began carving up the hard-won power Leithana bequeathed to her descendants. Slice after slice, the royal authority was served to their greedy husbands, who turned a blind eye to the growing hunger of the common district and the unchecked depravity of the nobles. Our current queen is nearly powerless next to her husband, King Tarkan. Though she is the heir of the most powerful woman in the world, Mariel is hardly more than a figurehead, a mere dragon on a bowsprit, hollow on the inside. What would Leithana think now if she could glimpse the future her efforts had wrought? I think she would burn it all down.